Today we're talking about skeleton woman, and I have a little pop quiz for you. Why is it that skeletons are always so calm? Anyone know? Because nothing can get under their skin. Oh, that wasn't a very funny one, huh? There was a young woman in my ministry in Nashville. I was a minister in Nashville for 14 years, for those of you who are new, the little new city in the United States, I guess, right now. Anyway, there was a woman who was a part of my ministry there, and when after the worship service, she would come through the line to say hello and shake my hand, and she always had an infant in her arms and a child clinging to her right hip and another child grabbing onto her left knee, and at the time she was pregnant with her fourth baby. And we used to laugh and say that she wears her children like jewelry. They were just adorned. They were draped all over her, and she was radiant. You could tell that she was in her right place, doing her right work, and on purpose to her life in every way. And it's easy to see that in people, isn't it? When somebody's hitting their stride, and they're on their A game, and they're about their Father's business, that's easy to see, isn't it? But today I want to talk to you about the times when we're not on our A game, when those not so beautiful parts of us kind of rear their heads, usually at times when we don't want them to, we're too busy, we're not expecting it, or whatever. The less than beautiful parts are psychological warts, the inadequacies, the inferiorities, the parts that we keep hidden or repressed away. I love Suzanne's meditation about becoming one, because we want to integrate those parts of us. We want to, rather than, I always say, what's repressed in us is like a giant beach ball that you're trying to hold under the water at the beach. And it takes a lot of struggle to keep that beach ball under the water, doesn't it? And when you take your hands off of it and whoosh, you let it come up, at first it comes up with a lot of force and a lot of water trailing behind it. But then what does it do? Sits on the water and it just bounces and just floats there. And that's kind of how these repressed things in us are. When we're holding them down and keeping them in, it's a struggle, and it takes great force and great focus to push that out of our mind, to not think about that, to not address that, to not deal with that, rather than just allowing it to come up and dealing with it. So the story of Skeleton Woman is a great little story that talks about that. First, though, I was reading in Charles Fillmore's book, The 12 Powers, this week, and he has a chapter called The Work of Imagination in Regeneration. And all of our message today is about the imagery of story. That's so fabulous. But the work of imagination in regeneration, in bringing ourselves into wholeness, in being born anew, in integrating those parts of us that are somehow have gotten distorted or wounded or shoved off to the side, to be able to integrate those into us on our own spiritual path, on our own advancing consciousness. Because until we bring all of the warts and stuff into us and heal them, and we won't go forward in our enlightenment. Mr. Fillmore says, we have within us, and this is unusual for him to say this, because unity was always about the positive. For years they wouldn't talk about the dark side or the negative or the unconscious. It was always affirm your life, affirm what you want to see. And they did denial, but they only did like a nanosecond of denial, and then everything was affirmation. So for Mr. Fillmore to write these words, it was pretty interesting that he was so specific. He said, we have within us, bound in the subconscious, all the propensities of fear, devils, demons, misconceptions, misperceptions, unworthiness, shame, guilt, anger, and resentment. In regeneration, these are brought forth, and a great reconciliation takes place. We find, he says, that there is nothing unclean, bad, or despicable except in our own thinking. In the original creation of divine mind, everything was made perfect, sanctified, and pronounced good and very good. Good and very good. In your original pattern of creation, You are the perfection and the image of the Christ. And then we do life. and then we do life, and we bump into things. And so, in celebration of Halloween, I want to share the story of Skeleton Woman. It's from the book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. How many of you remember that, by Clarissa Pinkola? And it's a story from the Inuit tribe at the North Pole, and it uses the power of imagination to show us how love can reconcile and integrate those parts that have been hidden and buried in us. It's a love story between two people, it's a love story between two people, but it's not a romantic story. It's a love story of reuniting two aspects within ourselves. The full everyday person and the part that needs to be integrated. So I invite you to just listen. It's going to take me just a minute or so to read the story to you. So let's all go back to 3rd grade. Didn't you love when your teacher read to you? I did. And let your heart be open to those places where once in a while you catch a glimpse, if you let it come up, of something that if it was just not there, you would be more. You'd be more on task, more fully awake, whatever it is. And just let the story speak to the inner parts of you. She had done something of which her father disapproved, although no one any longer remembered what it was. But her father had dragged her to the cliffs and thrown her over into the sea. And as she lay under the sea, her skeleton turned over and over in the currents. One day, a fisherman came fishing. Well, in truth, many had once come to this bay. But this fisherman had drifted far from his home place and did not know that the local fishermen stayed away, saying that the inlet was haunted. The fisherman's hook drifted down through the water and caught, of all places, in the bones of Skeleton Woman, in her rib cage, right? At your core, folks, at your core. And when the fisherman felt the tug on his line, he thought, oh, wow, I have really hooked a big one. And in his mind, he was thinking how many people could be fed by this big fish, and how long it would last, and how he wouldn't have to struggle and work every day and come back and do all this hunting and follow all of this stuff. And as he struggled with the great weight on the end of his hook, the sea thrashed and his kayak shook. And she who was beneath struggled to disentangle herself. She who was beneath. That's that aspect of us. And the more she struggled, the more she tangled in his fishing line. And no matter what she did, she was dragged upward. The fisherman turned to get his net, so he did not see her bald head rise above the waters and the waves. And when he turned back, her entire body had come to the surface and was hanging from the tip of his kayak by her long front teeth. He shrieked and knocked her off the boat with his oar and began paddling as fast as he could toward shore. Not realizing she was tangled in his line, he was frightened all the more when she appeared to stand up on her toes, chasing him after his boat. No matter which way he zigged his kayak, she stayed right behind him, arms flailing about as though to snatch him down into the depths of the sea. Our untamed, unintegrated parts will chase us, won't they? He screamed as he ran aground, and in one leap he was out of his kayak, clutching his fishing stick and running. All the while, her coral white corpse, still snagged in his fishing line, bumpity-bumped right after him. Over the rocks, over the frozen tundra he ran, and she kept right up. Finally, he reached his snow house and he dove right in. Panting and sobbing, he lay there in the dark, his heart beating wildly. Safe at last. Yes, safe. Thank God. Imagine when he lit his whale oil lamp, there it lay in a tumble on his snow floor. One heel over her shoulder, one knee inside her rib, one foot over her elbow. He could not later say what it was. Perhaps the firelight softened her features. but a feeling of some kindness came into his breathing. So we see light coming, right? And breath. And slowly he reached out his grimy hands, and using words softly like a mother to a child, he began to untangle her from the fishing line. First he untangled her toes, then ankles. On and on he worked into the night, dressing her in furs to keep her warm. I like this guy. You know, they always say flowers, that's a poor man's jewelry on Valentine's Day. This guy's flowers. He worked on and on into the night, dressing her in furs to keep her warm, until Skeleton Woman's bones were all in order. He gazed at her from time to time as he oiled his fishing stick and rewound the fishing line. And she, in the furs, uttered not a word. She did not dare, lest the hunter take her out and throw her down on the rocks and break her bones to pieces. The man became drowsy and slid under his sleeping skins and soon was dreaming. And sometimes as humans sleep, a tear escapes the eye, and this is what happened to the man. Skeleton Woman saw the tear glisten in the firelight, and suddenly she became so thirsty. She clanked and crawled over to the sleeping man and put her mouth to his tear. The single tear became like a river, and she drank and drank until her many years of thirst was satisfied. While lying beside him, she reached into the sleeping man and took out his heart, a mighty drum, and she sat up and banged both sides of it, bom, bom. And as she drummed, she began to sing, flesh, flesh, flesh. And the more she sang, the more her body filled out with flesh. And when she was all done, she laid down next to the sleeping man and returned his heart to his body. And that is how they awakened, wrapped together in a good and lasting way. Union. The people of the village say she and the fishermen went away and were consistently well fed by the creatures she had known in her life under the sea. Skeleton Woman. So Charles Fillmore says, we have within us, bound in the subconscious, all the propensities of fear, misperceptions, unworthiness, shame, guilt, anger, and resentment. And in regeneration, these are brought forth and a great reconciliation takes place. There is nothing really unclean, bad, despicable in divine mind. Everything is perfect, sanctified, and pronounced good and very good. All right. This is a hunting story. It's a seeking, it's a searching, it's about love. As I said, it's not a romance between two lovers, but a love story of reconciliation between two aspects in our own being. There are dozens of tales and myths throughout the world that describe the catching of a creature from under the sea. Aren't there? You probably know some and remember some from your childhood. And when this occurs, we always know that a big struggle is going to take place between the topside world and what's going on in the underworld. There's always that struggle for reconciliation. In this tale, the image is rich. He hooks into her very bones. He hooks into the core of how she lives, and he brings her up out of what's deep and dark and has been buried for a very long time. That second divorce, that illness, that wayward child, that what I've dealt with all this time, I've never been able to really make it or be as prosperous as I've wanted to. I've always had this sense of inadequacy. It's in the deep, it's in the dark, and it's been there a very long time. He didn't realize that he had hooked into his own core fear and that he was bringing up the scariest of treasure. It was scary because it's been in the unconscious, or we've repressed it and it's there. But something now has triggered it. He's hooked it. Something has triggered it in his life. And when the soul is ready, when your soul is ready for your next step on your upward journey, on your evolving, advancing consciousness, when your soul is ready for its next step, a great change takes place in you, and it's known as regeneration. Regeneration. Jesus referred to it in Nicodemus when he said, you must be born anew. You cannot change and stay how you've always been. There has to be this movement, and the movement takes place first in consciousness, in our ways of living, being, doing, and thinking. I believe that you're here at Unity and I'm here because we understand that our soul's growth is to not turn away when those things show themselves. When Skeleton Woman shows herself in your life, we know, we've been in Unity long enough to know that it's part of our soul's growth. And we recognize it as treasure. We have to come to recognize treasure as treasure, no matter how unusual the form or the shape of it is. What? That mother-in-law? That's a blessing in my life? Please. Whatever it is. I had a professor and a teacher in ministerial school, and we used to have to write our top 10 core beliefs. And so he shared his with us one time, and I don't remember all of them, but I remember one very specifically. And he said, everything and everyone is God in disguise. It's just that some of his disguises are better than others. Right? And if you could look at that situation in your life right now, whatever it is that's frustrating you or causing you anxiety, and acknowledge that that's God in disguise, that Skeleton Woman showing the top of her head in the waves, asking you, seeking that be integrated, find a way to integrate that into your life. When we confront Skeleton Woman, our first response is like the fisherman, to run, to dive for shelter, but we can't outrun her. Because she's a very part of us. She's in the core of our being. We can't outrun her, and so we want to stop running. And when we do, what happens is we can enter into relationship with her, and when we enter into relationship with her, we gain an enduring skill. We gain the skill, if we understand her, if we take one aspect and commune with it and work with it and learn to integrate it, we gain the skill to be able to integrate all those parts of us that are split off and distorted and rejected. All of those parts, we gain that skill. The skill that we use is what Mr. Fillmore is talking about in his chapter on the power of imagination in regeneration. We have been given a spiritual faculty of imagination to see ourselves and to see our lives and to create from that spiritual vision. Imagination is an attribute of God. It's defined in Unity as the formative power of thought. It gives shape and color and form to your thoughts, and then you add the vibration of your spoken word, and those come together and give birth to the activities and events and experiences of your life. In the silence, we use our imagination to lift our vision when we're working with integrating something in our life, some anger, disappointment, fear. We use our vision, our imagination, to lift our vision above things as they appear. Unity is great about not looking and not judging by appearances, but by judging righteous judgment. And the word righteous is right use of spiritual law. Judge with right use of spiritual law, which is seeing that original pattern of perfection that God is, that original pattern of perfection of the Christ. And we develop that, we use our imagination to develop the power to continuously see that in the face of something that doesn't look like that. You know, maybe you're working with anger and you use your imagination in the silence. You use your spiritual vision to see yourself as peaceful, to see your soul unperturbed and undisturbed. And you keep at that in the face of every experience and every event and every thought that counters that, because you're developing spiritual musculature. You're building spiritual musculature. And from then that high spiritual point, eventually what happens is you're able to see this superb thing that your soul is offering you, that it's not really anger, it's an integration of love in you. It's an integration of peace in you. You hold that high vision. You use your imagination to hold to the ideal of what you want to be, and then you're able to catch the superb thing that your soul is holding out for you. You're able to see what you're capable of bringing forth if you continue in that high thought. Because that's how our process works, right? We teach that here every week. Now, this superb thing can be achieved, but sometimes it can't be achieved until there's a little tweaking, a little soul pruning, right? Because we're integrating something that's been there a long time. It's the way it's always been, and so we have to tweak and prune and bring it forward. Marianne Williamson says in her book, Enchanted, I love how she describes this return to wholeness. Anytime there's a chance for deep love, there is standing in front of that love a wall of fire. That fire might take the form of something that's burning within you, or it might take the form of an outer circumstance. But there is never healing without fire. To the mystic, the presence of fire does not say, go away. To the mystic, the presence of fire says, here, if you are strong enough to take it, is love. Here, if you are strong enough to take it, is healing. Here, if you are strong enough to take it, is an integration of your soul that moves you forward in your eternal ongoing. Those are my words, not Marianne's. The presence of something scary and overwhelming does not say run away. It says it's the great I am saying, here I am. Here I am. It's offering you wholeness and integration. And so whatever within you that feels less than, or whatever within you that gets frustrated at times, and we're pretty good in unity at living the positive and living faith-filled and living proactively toward being on our A game and showing up in love, and we're pretty good at that. But there are those moments, and those are the ones that Charles Fillmore was talking about. When it shows up, even though we're apprehensive or frightened, we have to be willing to untangle those bones. Because as you untangle and unwrap those bones, you gain understanding. You untangle and unwrap the bones of Skeleton Woman and you put her back in order. And it comes with a soft firelight. The beginning of the light begins to reveal and show you how to put things in order, that there is a softness there, a softening in his breath, we heard. And so your breath work, your meditative time, the allowing of the light are all a part of healing. And then he puts it in order. And then he goes to sleep. He goes to sleep, which in fairy tales, sleep is always when the restorative work happens, right? You don't do the work. You go to sleep and the Christ spirit within you. It doesn't mean you go unconscious. It means you go into that point of silent, sacred stillness. Silent, sacred stillness. In creation myth, the soul goes into deep sleep while transformation takes place. Mr. Fillmore said, when something vital in a person's life is about to take place, the Spirit of Truth makes it known in a manner that can best reach into our consciousness. Often, this is in the stillness and silence of prayer, but often it's in the dream state while we sleep. We get hunches, inspirations, dreams. We also hear in the story that a tear escapes from the fisherman's eye and that Skeleton Woman drinks from it and receives life. And there's drawing power in tears. Tears are holy water. There's drawing power in tears. Again, in myth and fairy tales, tears call things to us. Tears show vulnerability and humility and innocence. Eric Butterworth said, what's the number one thing that compels God to act? And the answer is meekness, humility, vulnerability. You don't have to stand in that, I know it all, I know how it's all going to go. And so those tears call things to us. In fairy tales you cry and the fairy godmother shows up. In fairy tales you cry and the prince comes and everything turns out happily ever after, doesn't it? And it's the tears, the vulnerability that allows help from the universe to reach us. There's also song. Songs heal our wounds. They create a non-ordinary consciousness. That's the vibration of the word that's speaking into life. Flesh, flesh, flesh. Speaking into our lives this new paradigm of how we want to be and how we want to show up. And when Skeleton Woman beats the heart and sings flesh, 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 she performs a mystical act of awakening, calling on love to reunite what's been lost or disowned in us. So, to summarize all of that, isn't it a powerful story? In this love story, we're shown how to come into cooperative and rich relationship with what we fear. That we don't have to fear it. Now, you have a story, you have a paradigm that you can follow forevermore. You can follow Skeleton Woman. And when we do that, we learn to stop running from what scares us, no matter how long it's been there, how buried it feels, and how big or ominous it feels. That beach ball under the water, right? We stop running from it, and with compassion, with that light entering in, and with compassion, we untangle. We seek to understand what this is and how this happened. And then after we've done all we can do, we rest. We rest in spirit, and we give our heart to the process. And then we allow the regenerative work of the Christ Spirit to return us to our original pattern of wholeness. Because you're already totally whole. We're just remembering and integrating that wholeness more fully when we use this process. At this holiday of ghosts and goblins and spooks, I invite you to remember Skeleton Woman. To remember her anytime a less than beautiful part of you shows up, rises up, and recognize that when that happens, you have a chance for deep healing, for deep love and deep wholeness. Your scary thing may be an outer condition that's happening in your life, a threatening illness. It may be an inner condition. But those of us here who are growing spiritually, we know that that presence of whatever that is, it does not say run away. It says to us, here, if you are strong enough to take it, is love. Here, if you are strong enough to take it, is healing and wholeness. Here, if you are strong enough to allow it, is your love story that you can write. And so it is. I want to seal this morning with, in the book, 12 Powers, Cora Fillmore, Charles' second wife, added a complimentary section. Well, later on they put it together that way, where she had some prayers that supported the ideas. And I just want to have us close our eyes for a moment and hear a few of Cora's words to anchor this idea in us. I am now in the presence of pure being, immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. That's Charles' familiar word. And so allow yourself to allow this presence. I am now in the presence of pure being. Allow that presence to dwell in your heart. You've had your heart open this morning to those parts of you that are seeking integration. And see with your inner eye the real you, the real man, the real woman that you are. And allow this presence of, I like to think of it as the presence of Jesus Christ, to ascend into the space between your eyes, which is the faculty of imagination, the imaging faculty of your mind, where that third eye would be. And just affirm for yourself, through the eyes of love, I behold the image of the Christ implanted within me. This is the wholeness that you are, the image of Christ. Through the eyes of love, I behold the image of Christ implanted within me. And then allow that presence to drop back down into your heart. and rest there in the stillness. Thank you, God, for the opportunity to do this regenerative work in our imagination, in our souls, and in our spirits. We are grateful. And so it is. Amen.